So in the last build episode with this NC Miata track car, we got a ton done. We did all of the coilovers and suspension, rebuilt all the linkages in the rear, and overall did some stuff that really made a difference with this car. Unfortunately, shortly after I went out to test the car to do that, the engine was cutting power and being intermittent. So I went and explored why that might be happening a little bit. This is an NC1 Miata, and apparently for the NC1, the wiring harnesses can break down from heat over time and eventually get to the point where they're sending intermittent signals, and that's what makes the engine cut in mid-range RPM. That is exactly what happened. It felt like with my foot to the floor, there was just no punch there at all and the RPM was just crawling upwards. So today we're actually going to be redoing all of the coil pack wiring harnesses on the car today. I'm going to be doing it on all 4 cylinders, but it's essentially just replacing the connection that runs to the coil pack from the ECU. So that's going to be our plan for today, and hopefully that gets the engine running smoother and solves our problem and gets the car where it needs to be. This is what the faulty wiring harnesses sounded like at idle. To fix this, we need a crimp, a wire stripper, some new pigtails to replace the old wiring harnesses, some wire harness tape to protect it from heat, a heat gun for the heat shrink tubing, electrical tape, and the actual electrical connectors themselves. I got this entire process and method from a channel called Shifty Intentions. I'm going to link his video in the description as it was extremely helpful as a tutorial, so full credit to him on both this process and the actual materials needed. So the first thing that I did was vacuum out the engine to get any dirt and debris away from it before I started to do any of the work. The first thing that I had to do was unplug the wiring harness from both the coil pack and the fuel injector. By unplugging it from the fuel injector, it gives the entire cable a little bit more space to move and makes your life a whole lot easier. From there, the process is essentially to undo all of the electrical tape, which will give us access to the wires below. This was the hardest part and got quite tedious, as you have to be very careful to not cut any of the wires. Once you do that, you can access all of the old wires below that were the cause of the problem. Once you rewire the new pigtail in, it should look something like this. This was cylinder 1, which I wanted to test off camera before showing how I did it. You can see cylinder 2 right there with the old electrical tape on there, and cylinder 3 is what it looks like once you undo the electrical tape. So you can see there's 3 wires on each pigtail that run down that way, and those are the wires that we're looking to replace because they've gotten so old and brittle over the years and now send intermittent electrical signals. By fixing that, the engine will run smoother and we won't have a power cutting problem any longer. So the first thing that I did was put on a new pigtail. And once you do this, you can measure up how much length of each wire that you need to take by putting them side by side. From there, the process is essentially to cut each of the wires at an appropriate point, strip each of the ends, put on a new electrical connector, crimp both ends of the electrical connector to make a good connection, and then heat shrink the tubing on either side to really hold everything together. Once all of that's done, the entire thing is ready to tape back up and you can move on to the next one. Here is the rest of that process. So you can see the heat shrink at the end of the tubing really makes everything look a lot nicer. Here's what all 3 of them look like. This is what the finished product looks like. I've now crimped both ends of each of the wires and heat shrunk both sides. By doing this, you get a much tighter electrical connection, and you want to be careful with the heat to also not melt the wires, but you need to get enough to make sure that the edges of that are tight and are not going to ever let that wire slip loose. With that done, it was now time to tape everything back up. I did 2 layers of electrical tape at the bottom. It was the 3M Super 33 electrical tape, which is really good for high temperature application as the adhesive can handle it and won't melt all over everything. I then took 2 layers of the wiring harness tape around the outside, and that is good for a solid outer core that's fully going to protect everything from heat. Here is what they all looked like done. They're not as small and thin as the old ones because there are the thick electrical connectors in there, but it does work. Now I want to show you what the old connectors look like. So this was an old pigtail that came out of the car. And the first thing that you'll notice is that the wires are far thinner than the ones that I replaced them with. I don't know if this was a cost savings effort or I'm not sure why the wires that they used were so thin, but as a result of the thin wire and the excessive heat cycling that it has experienced over the years, they get so brittle to the point that they feel like a paperclip, where if you bend them back and forth too many times, they'll just snap in half. Thankfully, this solved the issue, and here's how the engine sounds. Everything is much smoother with that ticking noise entirely gone. With the engine at idle, I then went ahead and shook each of the new wiring harnesses. When I did this on the old ones, the engine would sputter as the connections were poor, but now they're no longer doing it and everything feels solid. So there we go, pretty quick and simple one for the build series this week. We swapped out the coil pack wiring on all of these coils, and now thankfully the engine is running smooth, no more misfiring. The sound is gone. It was making kind of a ticking sound. That's pretty much gone. The engine just sounds much smoother, feels much smoother, and the car has full power again. There's no intermittent power in that mid-range RPM. That entire problem is gone. The wires that came out were pretty brittle, so that was almost definitely the failure point and the cause. It was on cylinder 2, and I think the reason that it happened was that the engine cover pushes so far down on it and traps the heat in there. So I'm not going to be running the engine cover anymore. I've pulled that out and I'm not going to be putting it back in. Other than that, one more small just housekeeping thing. The engine oil was slightly overfilled, so I went ahead and pulled it out. That actually isn't nothing. Probably should have done that, but it's not anything egregious either. So that's out now. Now the engine level is proper and the whole engine is just running a lot smoother. So that's about it for this build series episode. We'll kind of see where we can go from here and hopefully get the car back out on track soon. But other than that, if you want to keep up with the rest of the series, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great day.